Welcome to this first and short video in introducing functions. The purpose of this video is not to repeat the lecture, but to give you a couple of practical, simple examples that you can code yourself to grasp and get your head around how functions work and why you use them. Let's start with a blank screen here. Now, the very easiest thing to do to help you when you're thinking about this is to actually separate out the bit where you're going to write all your functions. Right, so if I put all my functions up here, and then the bit in my same file where I'm going to actually run the functions. Now, the two bits of language we use is we say we call a function. And the way that we think about this is that a function is like a component that we build. We give it something and ask it to do something and often give us something back. That's one way we use it. We have other variations. So let's do that. But what I'm going to do is just try to tidy this page up. So instead of this little word functions, I'm going to use a big block here. This is just comments, hash. There's a hash there. So that allows me just to mark a part of my page. So this area I'm going to keep functions, and this bit down here I'm going to, for the purpose of this exercise, I'm going to call this, hopefully you can see that, it says main program entry point. Now, the reason that I've done this, and it's worth us understanding this, is that here I'm going to define a bunch of tools and functions. They're going to do different things for me, and here I'm going to use them. And the reason I've put these two blocks of comments is visually, and it might seem superficial to you, but visually it helps you organize how everything fits together. Let's take a very simple example and work with a simple example and introduce a function. So we'll keep this video short, and I'd like you to try this yourself. Hopefully this shouldn't be too unfamiliar. So let's begin down here. So in our main entry area, let's say the first thing I want to do is get two inputs. Let's say that they're going to be A, B. They're going to be numbers, and I'm going to ask, I'm going to prompt, please enter two numbers separated by a comma, and I'm going to write that there. So that line of code hopefully should be reasonably straightforward to understand. What's clever about Python is it allows you to take two inputs. Not all programming languages do that, so don't think this is generally true. Then what I want to do is simply create another variable, let's call it result, and I want to add them. And then very finally, I want to output. So I'm going to keep this really simple and just output the result, okay? Or we could say the answer is, and in order for us to use this, we use the curly brackets, and we use the format function, format, open bracket, put result in there, close bracket, and then close another bracket. Okay, before you go any further, just simply run the file. You'll see up here there's no error, and it's asked me, please enter two numbers separated by a comma, 34, 67, hit enter. Oh, and it's got an error. I like errors, and I especially like errors in video demonstrations, because it's very easy to make the code look like it should always just work. So let's have a look at this error and fix it. It says eval arg1 must be a string or code object. What I would suggest it's complaining about is this bit here, this eval. For the time being, I'm just going to get rid of that, and let's see what happens if I do that. Right, and we'll come back to it. So I've got two numbers, 34, 56, and the answer is 90. Interestingly, I didn't use eval, I just took it. There were two pieces of information 3456, and it's added them. Interestingly, what it hasn't done is it's just put 3456 as a string. It's made that interpretation, the environment has worked it out. Okay, so that's not go too complicated. I would write that in and code that in. So that's a nice result for adding. And let's say that I want to build a very basic calculator. Let's look at these 3 steps. This is very typical of any program. Input, some kind of process, and output. Most basic programs follow that 3-part structure. So I'm going to highlight this because it'll help you when you're thinking about how your code works, how the bits of the code all fit together, especially when you're starting to use functions and make your own. Now this is a relatively straightforward application. So my question to you is it possible, instead of just adding them here, that I create a function to add them and give me back the result? And the answer is yes. And what I'm going to do is create that component. So let's scroll up go into this functions area and create a component, a function. I use the def word. Now, straight away, in week 5 of your program, you will notice you've seen this a lot. And this word actually is very critical. It's called a key word. Let's put that up so you keep an eye on the words. It's a key word. What that means is that when you write that into your compiler, it's turned orange in this video demonstration as it has the word print. But it means that the environment knows that you are going to define a function. Now, if I'm going to define a function, think of a function as a component, or even better, think of it as a business department. And the purpose of this business department is to do something. And sometimes you give this business department something, it acts with that information, or you don't always give it, you just ask it to do something. So let's say that I want to create a simple add function. I'll call it add. And I want this function to take 2 pieces of information. Where do I put that? What does this bracket mean, and how does this work? So before I go into actually coding it, and it's worth spending some time on this so it's absolutely clear, imagine add is a business department, and this department needs, and let's say it's the equivalent of, say, a print department. If I had a print department, I would have to give them the piece of information to print, and I have to have a mechanism to give them the information. It's these brackets here that tell this department, this function, what it needs to do its job. So in here, I'm going to say I want one number and a second number. Now I'm using 4 words because it's easier when you're demonstrating a video like this how it works, what to do. What I want this function then to do is to add them and give that number the sum back, the result back. Look at this here. I'm trying to copy this process. Now you might simply say, and I'll stop this first video in a moment just to give you a chance to code this in. You might say, what's the point? This is so simple. What I'm trying to demonstrate to you is that functions can be simple or complex, but the logic of how you construct a function is always the same, and the concepts are always the same. So once you get it for a simple function, you'll be able to scale it up to any function. So let's pause this particular video and stop this one and leave you with a question of what are you going to put here. And what we'll do in the next video is work out what to put there and how we replace this line.